My name is Ginevra Cross. I'm 34, a corporate fraud attorney, and I hadn't set foot in my father's house in 11 years. The invitation to his 65th birthday gala came through a caterer's mailing list, not through him. I almost threw it away. Instead, I folded it into my leather portfolio, the same portfolio I carried everywhere, the one with the cracked corner from a case I'd won 3 years earlier against a man who thought paperwork couldn't touch him. I grew up Ginevra Sterling. I stopped using that name the night my father removed me from the family trust before sunrise. My mother, Ursula Sterling, chaired half the charity boards in the city. My father, Maddox Sterling, built Sterling Meridian Holdings into something that got written up in glossy magazines. I was 23, unmarried and pregnant, and none of that fit the photograph they sold to donors. I still remember my mother, before all of it went wrong, sitting on the edge of my bed the winter I had pneumonia, pressing a cool washcloth to my forehead every hour through the night. She didn't have to do that herself. She had people for that. She did it anyway. That's the part one never told anyone. That she was capable of it. That she chose later not to be. They gave me 3 documents on my father's desk. An appointment at a private clinic, a non-disclosure agreement, and a one-way ticket to Europe. My mother said I could come home once the problem had been handled. I refused. My sister, Nick Sterling, watched from the doorway. She told the relatives I'd stolen money and run. It was easier for everyone to believe I was a thief than to admit our parents had put their pregnant daughter out on the street. I slept in a friend's laundry room. I worked nights at a legal records company. I took community college classes with my daughter, Solana, asleep in a car seat under the desk. Every case file I touched, I learned to read the way you'd read a confession. Every discrepancy, I learned to write down. That habit is the only inheritance my family ever gave me on purpose. Now I want you to picture where you're sitting right now, and what the light looks like outside your window, because I want to know how far a story like this one can travel before it finds someone who needed to hear it. I didn't come back to that gala for forgiveness. I came back because 6 months earlier, a woman named Honor Bennett walked into my office with a box of donor statements from the Sterling Family Renewal Foundation. The first time I understood something was wrong, it wasn't a document. It was a phone call I almost didn't answer. Honor had been the foundation's finance director for 6 years. She said millions meant for housing programs had been moved into consulting companies tied to Nick's and to men who worked for my father. She'd flagged it internally. 2 days later, Nick's accused her of theft and had her fired. I told her I couldn't take the case. Conflict of interest, I said. My family. She said, I don't think you understand yet how much your family is involved. I almost hung up. Then she mailed me a copy of an authorization form. My signature was on it. According to the foundation, I had personally approved a transfer of $1.8 million out of a youth housing fund. The same week I was thrown out. I sat at my kitchen table and looked at that signature for a long time. The curl on the final letter of my name wasn't mine. It was Nix's. She used to practice forging it when we were teenagers, bored on car rides, turning my name into a game. They hadn't just erased me. They had kept my name alive as something to spend. I want to tell you the part that still gets me, before I go further. It wasn't the forgery. It was realizing that the story they told about my disappearance, the addiction, the instability, all of it, existed for exactly one reason. If anyone ever came looking for the missing money, there needed to be a disgraced daughter already gone, already unreachable, already guilty in everyone's mind before she opened her mouth. That's not shame. That's preparation. Have you ever found out that a lie you'd been fighting for years wasn't a mistake at all? That someone sat down and built it on purpose? I called Griffin Marsh, my father's longtime attorney, the same week. Not for help. To see what he'd say. He'd known me since I was a girl. Used to slip me peppermints during depositions I wasn't supposed to be in the room for. He listened to me describe the authorization form. There was a long pause on the line. Ginevra, he said quiet. Get everything notarized. Everything. Starting today. He didn't confirm anything. He didn't deny it either. But he told me how, and men like Griffin don't do that unless they already know what's coming. I didn't storm into anyone's office. I didn't call a reporter. I opened a case file the way I open every case file, and I started writing it down. I had no idea yet how far up it went, or how carefully my father had built the trap he thought I'd never find. 2 weeks after the phone call with Griffin, my mother reached out. Not through a lawyer. Not through Nix. She called my cell phone directly, a number she shouldn't have had, and when I picked up out of pure surprise, her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. I heard you've been asking questions about the foundation, she said. I'd like to see you. Just us. No cámaras, no lawyers. I should tell you that a part of me, a part I'm not proud of, wanted that call to be real. We met at a diner 2 towns over, somewhere no one from her world would recognize either of us. She looked older than her photographs. She asked about Solana. She asked if I was happy. When the coffee came, she reached across the table and held my hand. And for 4 minutes, I let her. I think about that winter you had pneumonia, she said. I think about it more than you'd guess. I remembered it too. I told her so. She cried a little, careful not to smear her makeup, and said she wished things had gone differently, that she'd spent 11 years regretting the clinic appointment, the ticket to Europe, all of it. She said Maddox had pushed harder than she had. She said she'd wanted to call me 100 times and lost her nerve every time. For 4 minutes, I let myself believe my mother had come back to me. Then she asked gently, almost as an afterthought, whether I had copies of that paperwork Honor gave you. I set my cup down. For your safety, she said quickly. Honor's unstable, Ginevra. She has a grudge against the foundation. You don't know what she's capable of fabricating. I want to tell you the exact moment my guard went back up, because I think you've felt it too. That half second where warmth turns cold in your chest and you understand, all at once, that someone was never comforting you. They were collecting information. I told her I didn't have the documents with me. I did. She hugged me goodbye in the parking lot. And it felt almost like being loved. That's the part one keep coming back to. Not that she lied. That the lie felt exactly like the thing I'd spent 11 years missing. Driving home, I called Griffin again. She met with you, he said. It wasn't a question. How did you know? Because your father called me an hour later asking if the documents had been secured. That was the moment I stopped hoping the dinner meant what I wanted it to mean. Honor called me on a Thursday morning. Her voice tight in a way I hadn't heard before. They're planning something for the gala, she said. I heard it from a board member who still talks to me. They're clearing out the old servers next week. Whatever's on there, once it's gone, it's gone. I drove to her apartment that night. She had a banker's box on her kitchen table, the kind with a lid that doesn't quite fit anymore from being opened too many times. I backed up everything before they fired me, she said. I didn't know what to do with it. I was scared to bring it to anyone. I lifted the lid. Inside were payroll records, internal messages, donor correspondence, and a small silver drive taped to the underside of a folder. I turned it over in my hands. It was warm from sitting in her bag all day. I plugged it into my laptop right there at her kitchen table. The first file was a spreadsheet. 9 years of transfers, dozens of them, routed through consulting companies with names that meant nothing, until I recognized one. Meridian Bright Solution. Registered to Nix's college roommate. I clicked through to the next file. A photograph of a building. The donor brochure called it a women's shelter, landscaped grounds, furnished bedrooms, a children's play area. I clicked to the next photo. The same building, unaltered. Boarded windows. A chain on the door. I sat very still. The third file was an email. My father's account. Subject line blank. One sentence inside. Use MC authorization if questioned. MC. My initials before I changed my name. I didn't cry. I didn't say anything for a while. I just sat at Honor's kitchen table with her cat rubbing against my ankle, looking at 9 years of my family's math, and understood for the first time that the number on the forged authorization form wasn't the whole story. It was the first page of it. "There's more," Honor said quietly. "A recording. Your mother, talking to a board member about a donor report." I asked her to play it. My mother's voice filled the small kitchen. "People don't give money for accounting details. They give money for the story we tell them." I photographed every document on that drive before I copied it. I made 3 separate backups before I left her apartment that night. One for my office safe, one for a colleague I trusted, one for a bank box under a name that wasn't Sterling. Before I go further, I need to say this plainly. I did not go looking for a way to destroy my family. I went looking for a way to stop being the answer to a question no one had the courage to ask out loud. I called the state's Financial Crimes Division the next morning. I disclosed my connection. I handed over what I had and stepped back, the way you're supposed to, and let people whose job it is to trace money start tracing it. It took 3 days for someone to mention that Governor Thorne Ashford had already been invited to speak at the gala. I'd worked with his office once, years earlier, on a bid rigging case that had nothing to do with my family. He didn't know my history. He only knew my work. I made one phone call. I didn't ask him to do anything except keep the invitation he already had. I spent the next 5 months building a case the same way I'd built every other one in my career. Quietly. Completely. Without ever raising my voice. I didn't decide to confront my family at the gala all at once. It built the way a case builds, one filing at a time, until the shape of it was obvious before I ever said it out loud. Corbett Reyes was the investigator assigned once the task force took Honor's files seriously. He was younger than I expected, careful with his words, the kind of person who wrote everything down twice. "You understand this doesn't end with a speech," he told me, the first time we met in a conference room with the blinds drawn. "It ends with subpoenas, forensic accountants, months of paperwork. If you're doing this for a moment in front of an audience, you're doing it for the wrong reason." "I'm not doing it for a moment," I said. "I'm doing it so the next person doesn't have to spend 11 years proving they didn't do it either." He nodded like that was the answer he'd been waiting for. For 5 months I did the parts no one claps for. I sat across from forensic accountants while they traced shell companies through 3 states. I gave sworn statements. I turned over every backup I'd made from Honor's kitchen table, every photograph, every email. Somewhere in that stretch of time, my mother called again. "Please," she said, and her voice cracked in a way I couldn't tell was real. "Whatever you think you have, we can fix this quietly. Family doesn't have to mean court." I told her I'd think about it. I hadn't thought about it. I had already decided. But I've learned that giving people room to reveal themselves works better than accusing them outright. So I let the silence sit there, and waited to see what she'd do with it. 2 days later, Griffin called me, his voice low. "They're moving the servers up," he said. "The gala's in 9 days. Whatever's happening, it's happening at your father's birthday, not after it. I want to tell you something I've never said to anyone else." For one night after that call, I sat in my apartment with Solana asleep down the hall. And I let myself feel the years all at once. The laundry room. The community college parking lot at midnight. The letters I mailed with photographs of her that came back unopened. I didn't cry that night either. I opened my portfolio instead. The same one I'd carried since law school, its corner still cracked from a case I'd won years before this one started. And I began putting the documents in order. Not for a speech. For the record. Corbett agreed to have 2 members of his team attend the gala as guests. Not to arrest anyone that night. To observe. To make sure nothing disappeared before it could be entered into evidence. The night before the gala, Honor called me one last time. "You don't have to do this," she said. "Yes, I do," I told her. "Not for revenge. For every name on that spreadsheet who thought a shelter existed and it never did." I hung up, and I packed the portfolio. And I chose a dress the color of nothing memorable, because I didn't want anyone in that room to remember what I wore. I wanted them to remember what I said. I crossed the ballroom before my mother saw me coming. "How dare you sneak in here?" she said, her voice cutting through the orchestra. And then her jeweled hand connected with my face in front of nearly 200 guests. My head turned with the impact. I didn't drop the portfolio under my arm. My father hurried over, not to defend me, but to grip my elbow. "Leave through the kitchen," he said quietly. "Don't embarrass this family again." Nick stood behind him in our grandmother's diamond necklace, smiling as security closed in. They thought I'd come to beg. They had no idea what was in my hands, and no idea that the man seated near the stage had already reviewed every page of it. A guard reached for my arm. A chair scraped across the marble floor. Governor Thorne Ashford stood, buttoned his jacket, and looked directly at my father. "Do you know who she is?" he asked. The room went silent. My mother's expression changed first. My father looked at the portfolio, and for the first time in 11 years, I saw fear replace contempt. "Governor, this is a private family misunderstanding," my father said, forcing a smile that looked painful under the lights. "No, Maddox," Thorne said. "The moment your foundation submitted forged financial documents to the state, it stopped being private." I opened the portfolio and removed the authorization form. "Is this the instability you mean?" I asked my mother. "According to your foundation, I personally approved a transfer of $1.8 million 11 years ago. I was 23, pregnant, homeless, and held no position in this organization." My father's eyes flicked to Nick's. Less than a second. The whole room saw it anyway. Nick's laugh, brittle. "Anyone could fake that. You're a lawyer. You know how easy paperwork is to manipulate." I'd expected that. At my signal, the screen behind the stage, set up for a tribute video, switched to a scanned ledger instead. The forged transfer. The shell company. The building that was supposed to be a shelter and had been boarded shut for 3 years. A donor near the front recognized the name of a program he'd personally funded. "That project never opened," he said. My mother lunged toward the technician. "Turn that off." Thorne raised one hand. "No one touches the equipment." I turned to Nix. "Tell them why you really left Ginevra," she shouted, trying to turn it back on me. "Tell them you got pregnant and disappeared because you couldn't handle it." "I didn't refuse help," I said, quiet enough that people leaned in to hear it. "I refused an abortion arranged to protect this family's brand." The silence that followed was total. I could hear the refrigeration unit behind the bar. I laid the clinic appointment on the table. The non-disclosure agreement. The clause tying my daughter's future to my silence. "You tied Solana's life to my silence," I said to my mother. "When I refused, you cut me off before sunrise, and used my name on a fraudulent transfer instead." My father's attorney, Griffin, standing near the back, took 2 slow steps away from him. I played the recording next. My mother's voice, filling the ballroom. "People don't give money for accounting details. They give money for the story we tell them." One woman who'd sat on my mother's board for 12 years unpinned her foundation badge and set it on a table without a word. I hadn't come back for forgiveness. I'd come back because my name had been hidden inside their crime, and I meant to leave with it restored. My father took the microphone and tried to sacrifice Nix to save himself, announcing he'd recently discovered irregularities she'd caused. She climbed onto the stage in fury and told the truth about all of it instead. The meetings, the funding cuts, our mother's staged photographs. They turned on each other in front of every donor in the room, and I didn't have to say another word. By morning, the foundation's grants were suspended. By the following week, warrants had been issued for the servers. My father was placed on leave from his own company before the sun came up. I didn't feel powerful when my mother's hand connected with my face, or when my father tried to walk me out through the kitchen. I felt something quieter than that. I felt clear. 3 months after the gala, my father and Nix were indicted on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and falsified filings. My mother faced separate charges tied to donor misrepresentation. The criminal cases took time. The rest didn't wait for a verdict. Sterling Meridian removed my father as chairman within the month. The foundation dissolved under court supervision. its remaining assets redirected to the housing programs it had used in its own advertisements for years. My mother's charity boards asked for her resignation before she could offer it herself. None of it gave me back my 20s. It didn't give Solana grandparents who'd shown up for a single school play. Revenge doesn't repair anything. It just stops someone from profiting off the version of the past they invented. 6 months out, my mother sent a handwritten letter. She apologized for the slap, the clinic appointment, the years of silence. Buried in the third paragraph, she asked me to write a statement saying she'd only acted under my father's influence. Even her apology had an exit built into it. I sent it back through her attorney without a reply. My father sent one message. He wanted Solana to visit before it was too late. I asked her, she was 11 by then, whether she wanted to. She read it once and asked me a question instead of answering. Did he ever ask how I was before he needed something from me? I told her no. She chose not to go. I didn't try to talk her into it. My family had never once respected a choice of mine, and I wasn't going to start teaching her to abandon her own. Nix asked to meet with me privately after her plea agreement was signed. She came without the diamonds. She said she'd spent her whole life believing only one daughter could be valued at a time. And when I left, she thought she'd finally get to be the one who mattered. Instead, she just became useful. I thought if you came back, I'd disappear, she said. You didn't have to love me, I told her. You only had to refuse to frame me. She asked if we could ever be sisters again. I told her the truth. I didn't know yet. Forgiveness, when it comes, isn't the same thing as restored access. Some people apologize because they finally understand what they broke. Others apologize because the damage finally reached them. Time is usually the only thing that tells you which one you're looking at. I helped start a legal clinic for whistleblowers and people falsely accused through financial identity fraud. Honor came on as an advisor to the rebuilt housing fund. The first shelter opened without the sterling name anywhere on the building. The women who'd lived there named it themselves. Harbor House. Solana helped paint a blue line along the wall of the reading room. Watching her laugh with paint on her hands gave me something that ballroom never could have. Proof that a legacy doesn't have to be inherited. It can be built honestly, starting over from nothing. People ask if exposing my parents in front of 200 people made me feel like I'd won. I didn't feel powerful when my mother's hand hit my face, or when my father tried to walk me out through the kitchen. I felt clear. For the first time in 11 years, I understood that their rejection had never measured my worth. It only measured how dangerous the truth was to them. I didn't destroy my family by telling it. The family they'd advertised never existed. There was only a business arrangement built out of fear, favoritism, and stolen money. Once I stopped protecting the illusion, it fell apart on its own. They thought they still controlled the door. I'd stopped waiting to be let through it years before I ever walked back in.